welcome to another Book and Tonic Boldwood Books Facebook Live. I'm Jo Bartlett and I'm here with my very good friend Paula Stroud. We're celebrating the release of A Change of Heart of the Cornish Midwife. Not sure if I've never do this the right way around. There we go. Which is slightly late, but we're here anyway. Thank you very much for holding on. We had a few technical issues, but we're here now. Just before we start, I want to say a few things. The first thing is to say a huge thank you to everybody who has supported the book, bought it, left lovely reviews. It means so much to me, as anyone who follows any of my social media knows, and it's what we're going to be talking about tonight. But some of the comments that I've had about this book have been absolutely stunning. So thank you, everybody who's done that. I also wanted to say that I'll be giving away a signed copy, or unsigned if you prefer. I won't be offended, I promise. To the person who we think asked the best question. If you're watching this on catch up, you can still ask a question. Paula and I will look at the feed until I think probably Sunday night to give the weekend for people to listen to it. And then I'll let Paula pick what she thinks is the best question. And we'll send out a signed copy to the recipient of that book. Just a few people are joining already. Lovely Jessica, Grace, and Ian. Thank you all for coming along. Hopefully we'll be joined by a few more people. Please do pop your questions on there if you want them. We've got a few set questions to answer, but we're happy to answer most other questions, I think, tonight, are we, Paula? Depending on what they are. So we'll come back to those every so often. The third thing I wanted to talk about was just, if we look like we're insulting each other and you think these people have 25 years of friendship, they don't even like each other. This is the love language of our friendship. The nicknames we have for each other, we cannot repeat before the watershed, probably. So I think it's probably best, if you get that vibe, we do love each other, really. It's just how our friendship works and why it's survived for so long, I think. And I think that's something I wanted to talk about. And if you follow my Facebook page, you'll see I've said that I'm going to talk about something that I've never spoken about publicly before tonight. And I guess our shared humour is a segue into that, really. I think that's what bonded us initially, didn't it? That sort of ability to laugh at ourselves and sometimes other people, let's just say. I think it was because for me, and when we've had this conversation since, that we didn't really feel like we fitted in with everybody else, maybe. When we first met, we were very young. Back in those wonderful days, we were teachers at an FE college, and we were a lot younger than everyone else, weren't we, back then?
Yes. Yeah, very much.
We were just laughing with lovely Claire from the marketing team at Boldwood because we had technical issues. And would you believe that we used to be IT and business tutors, and now my children laugh so much at the fact that we used to be tutors because we know nothing about anything. And we've been left so far behind in the years that kind of interceded that. But I think back then, we kind of found a kindred spirit in each other because we didn't necessarily feel like we fitted in. For me, and this is the thing I haven't spoken about publicly before, I had an eating disorder for a long time, actually, bulimia. And Paula, you'll remember some of the terrible binge eating diets I used to go on, where I used to have just lettuce and boiled chicken for a fortnight, or eggs and bananas.
Tomato juice.
Yeah, and I don't even like tomatoes, so that was quite something. So that was me. I think because I was 5'11", size 16 in my early 20s, didn't look like all the beautiful people, including my two sisters. Didn't feel like I fitted in, so I made jokes. So got other people laughing, I think, before they had a chance to laugh at me, and that was kind of my coping mechanism. And I guess for Paula, it was similar for you, but slightly different. How were things for you back then when we first met?
So I had an official diagnosis when we first met of muscular dystrophy, but it hadn't really presented itself that much. So I was a bit wobbly on my feet, put it down to clumsiness. And like you, I used to use humour to laugh at myself or to distract maybe from what was happening to me. It just made life a little bit easier. And obviously, if you get the first laugh in, everyone else automatically feels more comfortable, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you remember this, but we went on some training there's an update to the Disability Awareness Act. And we went on some training for our students so that as tutors and teachers, we could be more aware and help them out. And there was some staff in there talking about how to help different students, and also, about their own disabilities and challenges, talking about things like dyslexia, partial hearing and things like that. And the guy that was delivering the training said, is there anyone in the room who identifies as disabled? and I looked at you and you gave me this look that said, speak to you. And absolutely, back then you just wouldn't acknowledge it.
No, I had a name for it, but I wouldn't accept it. And I think in my head, if I didn't accept it, then it wasn't happening, and I could just carry on as normal. So that was I never saw myself as disabled then at all.
No, absolutely not. And you know, as a part of what you've achieved, all the things you have, is the tenacity that you've got to do what you want to do, and not what other people.
Tenacity, others may say blind stubbornness, but you know.
Well, I could use other words for it, but you know, like I said, it's before the water. I'm not going to say what I would normally say. You know, we're going to be very careful tonight.
Yes.
We don't know.
Best behaviour.
Just a few other quick hellos to people who've joined us. I've got lots of people tonight. We've got a lovely Georgina Troy who's joined us, Lauren Hewitt, Mary Grand, Grace Power, Judy Lee, Susan Stroud. Is that one of your? Is that someone you know? Paula? Hi. Yeah. Emma Jane, which I think is Emma, is it? And Sarah Price, Pranith, Pat, Misa, and my niece Holly. Lovely to see you all. And yes, do pop some questions on there if you want to. Ask us anything. Jeannie, who we both used to work to.
Hi, Jeannie.
Back in the day. And in fact, Jeannie was your tutor, wasn't she, when you were a student at the college?
Yes, she was indeed. And I can only apologise to Mrs. Monaghan now for anything.
And lovely Danny's joined us as well. Telling us we're gorgeous. But Danny, we need your filters. You know we only look gorgeous when you filter us. So what are you playing at? You know, we need you.
If this was Danny, I'd be looking into a wind machine right now with soft focus and everything.
It would. You definitely would. We'd look so good, wouldn't we? We should have put those pictures up, the ones that Danny took of us when we went to Leeds. So they were the best. 100%. The best pictures I've had, I think they were actually.
No, I know, brilliant.
I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but in terms of representation of disability, that's one of the things we're talking about tonight. In our lifetime, we've seen a huge leaps in lots of areas. I think if body positivity had been a thing back then, you know, I might not have had a eating disorder for almost 20 years actually. So you know, that's come on leaps and bounds. The representation of the LGBTQ plus community has come on leaps and bounds, even to a certain extent age representation, if you look at what's in the media and things, although there's ways to go on that. But disability representation to me still seems like an area where it's not, particularly in terms of literature, I think, you know, commercial literature.
Yeah, we were talking, weren't we? And we said, I know I could only think of one book before yours that I'd read. I'm sure there are others out there that was a bestseller that represented disability as the main character.
Yeah.
There is, but even on television, you know, you watch any soap, they'll have a token disabled person on there just to tick the box, but it's not the norm. It's not something I don't think people are maybe entirely comfortable with it still. So I think there is still a long way to go.
And do you think when disability is represented, there's kind of this tendency to kind of represent inspiration? You know, you've got to be climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. I know you love this.
Are you saying I'm not in the inspiration, Jo?
Well, it's inspirational how much you can drink, I have to say, on a night out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think they always have to be that inspiration. Aren't they brave? Isn't it incredible? And actually, they're just cracking on with their lives. They're just getting on with everyday stuff. And sometimes that can be difficult, but it can be difficult for anybody. So it's not really inspirational.
Yeah. And you find that quite irritating, don't you, if people describe you as...
The thing is, I find a lot of things irritating, but I know it comes from a good place. And I also know that a lot of people use that because they're trying to think of a better word. But sometimes it can be patronising.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not inspirational for just being here. I like to think I am, but that's just my self-inflated ego. Actually, I'm just like everybody else. We're just getting on through the day.
And that's the kind of representation you'd like to see in commercial
literature. Yeah, definitely. Let's not make it inspirational or the struggle or this, that, or the other. Let's just throw them in there as the norm.
Yeah. When I was doing the research for A Change of Heart, 20% of people have a recognised disability. So there's a huge proportion of society who it affects, but that I really haven't seen it represented, and it's why I've wanted to write this book for such a long time.
Yeah, I was really grateful when you mentioned it. I was so pleased because, like I say, I can only think of one book that I've read that's had disability mentioned in it. So,
yeah, absolutely. A message from Sarah Kingsworth online, who's saying she's registered as a severely sight impaired, and definitely aren't many of us represented in books. So I think, that kind of leads on to my next question, really, about, do you think that some disabilities are viewed as more, more able to be represented than others? We talked a little bit about some things. You see certain disabilities don't get represented, and others are kind of largely ignored, almost as if some are more attractive or palatable.
Palatable, I think,
that is how it seems to me, and it's an awful thing to say, but is that something you think is the case?
Without a doubt. There are the ones that I call, and I'm probably going to get shot for this, but there are the sexy disabilities, okay? The ones people can get their heads around, the ones that don't freak them out or frighten them, the ones that they feel most comfortable with. And if anything, they're the ones that I see represented in a book or in the media or on television. But they are very much your generic. Not that they're any less of a disability, but you do seem to the same repetition of the same disabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had some comments in some of the reviews and feedback from people saying, oh, we expected, without too many spoilers, this to be a temporary thing for Ella, and that she was going to get over it. But life doesn't play out like that, does it? And like you say, it's it's the sort of everyday, the difficult parts that are the challenges that represent. You can't just whitewash over those as some fiction and movies do. Not everything has a Hollywood ending, has it?
No, if only. No, absolutely not. And I think, if anything, it's the minority that actually end up with the happy ever after, perfect ending. The majority, it just doesn't work that way for. And it might make it more palatable or easier for the reader, but it's not realistic. And I think the sooner we can kind of get people to understand that it doesn't work out in the end for most people, then that's when the understanding kicks in. All the while we say, oh, but it was only temporary and everything's going to be okay. That might make them feel better, but that's not helping us with the ongoing understanding.
Absolutely. But I think the flip side of that is it's about, using a phrase I don't particularly like because I'm not an Instagram generation person, but living your best life within those circumstances. It's not about being the same as everybody else, is it? It's about, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you've done in the last few years, some of the things we can talk about on here. Sarah said, she's loving the honesty of that chat. So in the vein of honesty, have you yourself ever represented your own disability in a different way to make it more palatable?
Oh my God, right. I'm probably going to be hated now from the rest of my fellow disabled community. But yeah, absolutely. More so when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I remember I went on holiday with my friend Emma and we went to Tenerife. And it was full of these gorgeous, perfect girls and me. And I was holding my own. But obviously there was something a bit different about me. I walked a little differently, slightly unsteady on my feet. It hadn't affected my upper body, but definitely my lower body. And I remember my friend Emma said to me, one of the guys was asking, we met a group of guys, and one of the guys was asking, what's going on? What's wrong with you? She said, and I didn't know what to say. I said, and I apologise to anybody that's been involved in a car accident. It was the first thing that came into my head. Just say I was in a car accident and I smashed up my pelvis.
Yeah.
And she said that and they were like, oh, okay, right. And after that, they stopped looking, they stopped the whispers, they stopped the quiet chat between themselves, and no more was said about it.
Absolutely. So, I think it's that sort of, like you say, it's something that they can relate to and understand. But I do think that the lack of representation of broader disabilities doesn't help that, does it? Because like you say, they're what people understand, they're what people see. And unless we start writing about and representing a whole gamut of disabilities, that's not going to change, is it either, really?
No, absolutely. I think the more you get it out there, the easier it will be. It will be uncomfortable for people, but that's life. And the more you're surrounded by it, the more comfortable you become with it.
Absolutely.
You're not going to catch it, I promise.
Now, lovely Judy Lee's asking a question about writers here. She's saying, she loves the way writers of good books are such fab personalities. Do you think it's important as a writer to have lots of bubble? Now, you're going to laugh, Paula, because you're going to say I'm I've got no personality whatsoever, aren't you?
Well, you said it, Jo.
I think what it is for me, I guess it's about inquisitiveness. And if you like talking to people, listening to people and having a personality, the kids always laugh at me, because if anyone's going to come and ask someone to help them cross the road or ask a question or strike up a question with a complete stranger, it's going to be me. Because for some reason I look welcoming and friendly. I've got a kind of an every woman face that people feel like they can talk to. You've perfected a different look, haven't you? You can't talk about. But no, Judy, I think it is that, that openness, that sort of wanting to talk to people, wanting to interact with people. I think it's really important for a writer. And Judy writes absolutely lovely books which have great representation of sort of older generations, which I heartily recommend to anyone who hasn't checked them out. They're really great. So if you haven't, have a look at Judy's books, because as I'm getting to be an older lady myself now, that I really like to see that representation too. Now that I'm a nana, I like to see those things represented in commercial fiction too. Another question I was going to ask you, and I know the answer to this, but for the benefit of the audience we've got tonight, talking about people understanding your conditions and their inquisitiveness, and sometimes that comes from a good place, but sometimes it comes from a not so good place. Have you ever been on the receiving end of any sort of negative comments or
oh my God, where do you want me to start? Yes, most days, most weeks. I've since school I've had some horrible ones, and I think that's where I learned to be quite a loud, in your face personality, because then it would put people off of saying anything, and if they did say something, I was loud enough to act like it didn't bother me.
Yeah,
and it absolutely does, and it's still, to this day, it still hurts. People have got better, don't get me wrong, it's getting a lot better, but you'll still hear the odd comment and you just think, why did you feel the need? Use your inside voice, say it inside your head. You didn't have to say it out loud. I hope that's made you feel better today, because
it does make me wonder about what on earth people who do that get out of it. What is it that drives someone to make a comment like that?
Well, in my experience, I don't know the ins and outs of everyone that says horrible things, but quite often it's their insecurities. So you just have to you get better at letting it just wash over you, and just put it down to the fact that they're clearly very insecure, and you've got to feel a little bit sorry for them, hope they have a better day, and move on.
Right, lovely. Nikki Preston has made a comment for us. She's talking about the fact that she has had a disability for a long time. For a long time, she pretended it wasn't happening, but she said she's really happy and happily living with her disability and really body positive. But she says, oh no, the comments. She's had awful comments, including, "Can you have sex?"
Yeah.
Really, that question would that question be asked to a non-disabled person? Absolutely not.
Jo, online dating. I sent you that message. So one guy, he'd been chatting away with me. Oh my God, you're amazing. You're funny. You're gorgeous. And then I said, just checking, you have read my bio. I just wanted to make sure. And he sent back this one sentence: I can't date someone in a wheelchair.
No.
I'm the same person I was yesterday. I'm just sat down a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've
also had inappropriate comments about fetishizing as well, the disability.
Oh yeah, there's been some corker comments about, apparently there's a thing for it. It's a kink.
Yeah,
not one I'm particularly interested in.
These people have given us a good laugh. They don't know how much they've made us laugh. Actually, we got a lot out of it.
Some good material.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just just so you know, as Nikki says, absolutely those questions would not be asked, I don't think, of a non-disabled person.
No, absolutely not.
Is it appropriate to ask? Absolutely not. But again, it's this lack of understanding and ignorance, and just plain rudeness. Actually, I think from some people.
I think it's somebody's ignorance, and I always think to myself, I hand on heart hope that they never have to find themselves in my position or someone close to them, and then have someone else say that comment to them, because then maybe they would realise how hurtful it can be.
Yeah,
I know the irony there is people think I can be quite, I've got quite a tongue on me, but I would never get that personal.
No, absolutely not. And anything, it's just to detract, isn't it? You wouldn't, do that to someone. But it's to detract from yourself. Sometimes you use humour, like we talked about.
Yeah.
And lovely Danny might have let us down in terms of filtering us tonight and making us look gorgeous, but he has asked us a question. Danny. Given the lack of representation in mainstream media, what do you hope people might take away from this, having read this book?
Hopefully, having read the book, they realise that people with disabilities have a sense of humour. We don't always walk around with massive chips on our shoulder. We go through exactly the same things as able-bodied people, and we come up with the same problems and difficulties that able-bodied people do. Sometimes we'll come up with a few extra just because we are extra and we love being extra. But just that we go through the same things that everyone else does. And to hopefully not be as scared of us or as wary of us as they seem to be now.
I mean, we've had this conversation, that people I have introduced you to who I've known have said, I didn't expect Paula to have a sense of humour, which is mind-blowing. What about the fact that you're a wheelchair user means you can't laugh? Yeah. And as you know, Leo in A Change of Heart, his sense of humour is largely based on yours. So
yes.
That's
I've got a man's sense of humour. I'm quite
I
proud.
think we invented being savage before savage was a thing, but
100%.
We won't talk about that either. I'm sure Jeannie and people who knew us back in the day would probably agree with that. They used to call us Trini and Susanna because we were quite cutting. Because we were fashion gurus ourselves, weren't we? I mean, we always
100.
But really, that sort of was part of our whole, I think, defence mechanism. Was doing those kind of things. We talked about this a little bit already about acceptance, and I think Nikki also spoke about this in one of the questions, just scrolling back. It is about struggling. Ella struggles in A Change of Heart to accept her diagnosis and what the disability might mean for her.
Yeah.
Does that relate to your experience or experience of other people you know in the disabled community?
As in,
she found it difficult to love herself because.
My gosh, absolutely. I can be honest now because I'm getting more and more comfortable with myself, but it's only been, I would say, within the last 2 or 3 years I've been able to look in the mirror at myself. I, as you know, went on quite an epic trip, and if anyone asks to see those photos, and I get them out regularly.
I know. I've seen the book, the hardback cover book.
Absolutely. But you won't see one picture of me in those pictures because
they're all views, aren't they? They're all views.
Yeah, all views. I just couldn't look at myself. I mean, I'm over that now, but yeah, at the time, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I just kind of thought, if I can't, why would anyone want me? Why would anyone be interested or love me if I can't even feel that way about me? So it was quite a tough time.
That's something that you've worked through now?
I have now, thanks to really good friends, begrudgingly yourself included, and a little bit of counselling and my dog. I have now, but it's taken a long, long time.
Yeah. And one of the things I know, I mean, you were quite the career girl, although we joke about, sometimes we loved our job, sometimes we hated our job. I think for both of us, actually, we had a bit of a catalyst for why we left teaching or left that particular education institution. For me, I had kidney cancer, and it was a kind of wake-up call of, I was 39, it was now or never. I think I'd worked 39 hours or 30 hours overtime the week before because we had an Ofsted inspection. I'd missed the kids' sports days, and I thought, do you know what, I'm just not doing this anymore. If I've only got a year or 5 years, there's no way I'm, carrying on giving this place everything when it gave me nothing back. One of the things Ella struggled with in a change of heart is the idea that she loves midwifery and the idea that she might not be able to be a midwife anymore. With your diagnosis of muscular dystrophy and the progression of that, how did that affect you in terms of your career?
Well, massively so. When I was obviously up until 9 years ago, I had the diagnosis, but I was up on my feet. And then obviously I had a fall and that changed. And the doctor said to me when I was in hospital, it's your body's way of warning you that you're doing too much.
Don't forget to tell them, they also said you're not allowed to live on salt and vinegar Pringles anymore.
Well, he may have mentioned that. I'm still incorporating it as it is still a vegetable. It's a potato product. And I will argue that in the face. However, no, he said your diet is terrible. And he was quite right because, you work long hours. I did 2 evening classes a week.
Yeah.
You'd never get time for lunch or rarely get time for lunch. If you were doing an evening class, you just tended to work right through. And by the time I got home at 9, I didn't want to eat anything. So I wasn't eating. So I was wonderfully skinny, but, inside was absolutely diabolical. And the fall was my body's way of saying enough. You've got to slow down.
Yeah.
And I was really scared to do that because up until that point, I felt like my job defined me.
Yes.
I was not.
I think one of the things that irritated me about what happened to you and the way everything was handled, just from a sort of broader sort of policy perspective, was the fact that you wanted to carry on working, but you just couldn't work those long, demanding hours anymore. But there was no scope. You either had to retire on ill health, and that was that, or you had to carry on exactly as you were. There's no middle ground, is there? No accommodation made for people with disabilities to, yes, they want to carry on doing what they love, but maybe not in quite as full on a way as they have before. And I found that.
I think what makes me laugh is I've been listening to, with the recent budget and the government talks saying that they want to encourage more disabled people back to work. Well, how are you going to do that then? Because it was, as well as the college policies, it was the pension policy, the teacher's pension, that kind of stipulated, well, you either give up now on full pension or you carry on as you are, but otherwise we're going to cut your pension and you'll be worse off. So how are you going to encourage that then? Because I haven't seen any sign of it myself, if I'm honest.
No, absolutely not. It's sort of just, it was an all or nothing scenario, wasn't it? And that just makes no accommodation for that must affect an awful lot of people, mustn't it? That sort of same situation.
Yeah, I think so. I'm certainly not the only one in that, and, despite what people think, you're not better off on benefits. I'm sure there are some out there that play the system, but I can't think of anything worse, to be honest, than living, off of benefits.
And we'll talk a little bit in a minute about some of the things you've done since you had to retire from teaching. In the meantime, I'm just going to check whether we've got any other questions. A few questions about the Pringles. Sarah says, salt and vinegar Pringles are not part of a healthy balanced diet. She's going to stick to the barbecue flavour from now on. Is there a vegetable flavour? Or what about cheese and onion? Cheese and onion? Is it cheese and onion flavour? There must be some vegetable flavour.
Cream and chives is quite it's almost vegan.
I mean, just it must be somewhere. And Abina says potatoes in any form are good. So
thank you, Abina. Thank you.
Absolutely agree with that. With a change of heart for the cornice midwife, Ella has a bit of a catalyst that makes her finally stop pretending that nothing has changed and think differently about her MS and work towards accepting her diagnosis. Was there a catalyst for you? You've sort of touched on this a little bit. A catalyst for you that changed the way you think or act about it? Yeah.
Obviously, being in the wheelchair meant that see, in my head, I thought I was hiding it. But I look back now and it was so blatantly obvious what there was something going on. I wasn't hiding anything. But the wheelchair became a visual for everyone to understand, oh, okay, there's something going on there. And when I left work, I decided that if I didn't start traveling, I would never travel. It was not going to happen. So I decided to book a cruise around the world. And it was during that time away that made me realise that life isn't over. If I can travel on my own and visit, you know, all these different countries and survive just fine, obviously 3-course dinners and waiter service and cocktails on tap didn't hurt. But if I could do all of that, then I was going to be just fine. And I need to kind of just get over myself, if I'm honest.
I think, you know, the wheelchair was a huge catalyst from an outside point of view. I mean, we went to Dublin, didn't we? I think I was pregnant with my daughter then, so that was 22 years ago now. And as enjoyable as the trip was, I think the fact then that you just were so determined not to have that visual symbol of disability, that actually you made life incredibly hard for yourself.
Yeah, and what was ridiculous was, if I hadn't have been so stubborn, it would have been a lot easier and I'd have had even more fun. But I still wasn't there at that point. I wasn't ready to.
No, and it is, you know, I think I talked about in the blog post that I did for Change of Heart. It's almost like a grieving process, isn't it? Where you go through those stages of
absolutely
before you get to acceptance, because it's
absolutely. Like you wake up one day and you're getting ready to go to work, and then bam, everything changes, and the person you thought you were has changed completely, because it doesn't just affect the obvious, like your work and your living conditions, but it affects what goes on inside. And I have to say, and I never thought I would say this a few years ago, but I would say what happened to me is probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
You're talking about when you had the fall? And
when I had the fall and ended up in the wheelchair, it was one of the best things. I would never have said that at the time, or if I'm having a bad day now, I'd tell you you're stupid. But yeah, I tell you you're stupid all the time.
It is, I think, it's the symbol, like you said, you don't get so many negative. When I first met you, and you know, it wasn't obvious what your disability was, or even whether you had a disability or there was something else going on. I can remember us walking along and someone shouting out about you being drunk or whatever. And you know, there was another time that you went to a workplace and had a fall, broke your neck, and walked around for 2 weeks with a broken because you wouldn't accept.
I remember that.
Actually, you know, having more support and taking that step, and I can understand completely why you didn't want to do that, but it was a huge barrier. But then when the fall forced you to accept that, I mean, we've done so much stuff since then.
Oh, absolutely. I've probably fit more into the 9 years that I've been in the wheelchair than I have throughout my adulthood before that, hands down. I would say no to things more than yes, and now it's complete opposite.
And going back to your trip around the world, what was your favourite place?
Oh gosh, that's like asking me to pick my favourite niece or nephew. Sorry, I'm looking at my little dog down here begging for attention. You're my favourite.
We'll be talking about her in a minute.
Okay, so I would have to say the place that I didn't think I would love, but I fell in love with, was Cape Town.
Yeah,
absolutely stunning, beautiful place.
And did you find did you find there was a difference in terms of disability access in the different places you visited? Did that affect how you felt about places?
Well, it was a bit humbling actually, because Vietnam was another fantastic place I went to, and as we were going for a walk, I remember bumping into, not literally, but bumping into a guy who was in a makeshift wheelchair that consisted of wooden fruit and veg crates with what looked like roller skating wheels on the bottom, and that was his wheelchair. And he kind of pushed it along with his arms on the floor, and he was just amazed at my chair and, you know, the the flashing lights, the up, down, the recline. And you think, it then makes you realise how lucky you are.
Absolutely. Did you comment on the fact that it says quickie on the back of your wheelchair? Because that
No,
always attracts comments. That always attracts comments when we're out.
Not only does it mention quickie,
of all the wheelchair brands to choose, I'm just not saying anything, but
it's a quickie salsa. I've neither been quick or salsa'd in my life.
Oh dear. My granddad absolutely loves the buttons and the lifting mechanism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's his favourite.
Doesn't he? Do you think, in your experience, that people are frightened? I think Lindsay has said people don't want to seem to understand and respect disabilities. Do you think that people are like that out of a fear of saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, I think so. It's like I mentioned to you earlier, especially in this day and age, we are afraid of offending. So quite often people won't say anything at all. And I don't think it's out of being rude. I think it's born out of not knowing what to say.
Yeah.
And I saw a fantastic interview this morning, actually, with Eddie Izzard. And he was talking about his transgender process. And he said, if there is anybody out there that doesn't know or doesn't understand, please ask. Because the only way you're going to know and the only way you're going to understand is by asking. And I won't be offended. No question will offend me. And I'm very much the same way now. I would rather somebody ask me. In fact, little children are incredible at asking the most insightful questions. It's as we get older, we tend to kind of get a bit more uncomfortable with it.
Absolutely. I think it's just, I think there is, particularly in the current climate, the cancel culture and everything else, there's a certain fear of saying or doing the wrong thing.
I do. And, I have myself, I'm a member of several disability groups on Facebook and Instagram. And I myself have come across some people that personally I feel have got a huge chip on their shoulder. And God help you if you ever come across one of them and say the wrong thing. And I think we just need to soften it a little bit. Let people make mistakes. Let them ask questions.
I think if it comes from a good place, that's
absolutely
from a good place and not deliberately hurtful.
No.
Just a quick reminder: do ask a question. I know no one wants a signed copy of this book, but I promise not to sign it if you do. But please do ask some questions if you.
And I'll throw in a packet of salt and vinegar drinks.
The desk if no one wants to ask any questions, but we'll carry on with the ones we've got now. I think I think it might have been Nikki that said that she doesn't like seeing people with disability represented as grumpy or anguished. What do you think the most common misconceptions of disability are?
Oh, that's tricky because I think there's a few. I think a lot of people think we're quite angry with the world, and we're really not. A lot of people think we don't have the same capability to think as regular normal people, if you like. So couldn't possibly ask us a question. I mean, you know when we've been out, mate, the amount of times people will look over me and ask you the question when it's about me. I just think people think we're a little bit angry with the world and we don't have the ability to think and answer for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that's
which is a shame because I could do both very well.
You can. And for everybody else in the room, let's face it.
Absolutely.
Coming back to the point of you're not grumpy and angry, let me come back to that. It depends when they catch you. It depends.
It's not about my disability. I am just grumply and angry. Just not about that.
That's just you. But I think it is that thing, isn't it? And it's almost like you've either got to be, you have no capabilities, or you've got to be this huge inspiration. And not just that disabled people are as wide a spectrum as any other sector of society.
Absolutely.
There will be miserable, grumpy, disabled people. But there will be disabled people who are really happy and love their life, just as there are every other sector of society. And I think there's this tendency to pigeonhole. There's also, I don't know if you've seen that, I think it's on BBC Three, that series called Jerk, which kind of
funny enough, I watched it for the first time last night.
Yeah, which challenges the view that all disabled people have to be lovely or, to be, pitied or, again, that challenges that view. It's good to see some of those programs coming out now, isn't it?
Yeah,
sort of challenging the view.
Definitely. Did you see the series Am I Being Unreasonable?
Yes, I did, with Daisy May Cooper.
Yeah. So obviously the young guy in that is disabled. But what I loved about it, and it's the first time I think I've seen that kind of thing, where his disability is not the main issue.
No.
It's just a part of who he is. What his main issue is that he's actually the carer for his mother because she's a mess.
He's the parent, isn't he?
Yeah,
and he's
absolutely.
So funny.
Hilarious.
Yeah. So again, if you haven't checked out Am I Being Unreasonable, we both highly recommend it, don't we?
Definitely. Got to watch.
There's going to be a second series on that one. So
brilliant. I'm not quite sure how that would work though, given the ending. But
yeah, I don't know whether they're going to do a completely different story with the same actors, but great news that again that representation and it's not token representation because he's an
that's what I mean.
Absolutely. Actor.
I don't think.
Role.
Yeah, it wasn't mentioned. I don't think it was mentioned once. It's just his character.
But if somebody played that part as well as him, but without a disability, it wouldn't have made any difference to the storyline, would it? It's absolutely about
not. And that's the kind of inclusion I'd like to see.
The interaction between him and his mum and dad was what was about. Talking of parenting, one of the secondary storylines in A Change of Heart for the Cornish Midwife features Jemima and her husband Leo. Leo has been paralysed after falling from some scaffolding, and they're thinking about whether or not to start a family. And they're introduced to two different people who have muscular dystrophy, the same condition that you have, Hayley and Charlie, and their partners, who've made very different decisions about whether or not to start families of their own. I mean, I know the answer to this, but was that something that you thought you considered and thought about when you had your diagnosis?
It was, for me personally, it was a no-brainer, and I don't judge anybody that chooses to have children or not, chooses not to have them. But that's regardless of disability. I know people that are able-bodied that have chosen not to have children. My personal feeling is I didn't want my child to end up being my primary carer.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying children of disabled parents all end up becoming primary carers, but that was my fear. So I chose not to. That being said, I've seen a lot of disabled families with disabled members of the family cope fantastically well, and it just is what it is. So I think it very much is, but again, like it is with able-bodied people, it's a personal choice. For me, it absolutely wasn't a question. I chose not to.
But I think again, part of that might come back to the policies and the support that is there for disabled parents, particularly if they're left as single parents.
Yeah.
If there was more support for people, you wouldn't see the situations where young people and children are becoming primary carers to a parent. So I think it goes back to, again, that sort of understanding and support for what disabled people need to live their best life, whatever that looks like, whether it is having a family or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before this happened to me, I won't lie, I thought, probably like a lot of other people, there's a lot of help out there. All you've got to do is look for it. No, there isn't. There isn't anywhere near the support and help that there should be. All of this, I think we brought in the Disability Discrimination Act, so we tick that box, and we haven't revisited it since. And it's so antiquated now when you look at it. So much has changed that it does need looking at again, and it does need revisiting regularly. Because there isn't anywhere near enough support for people with disabilities.
And I think that makes decisions that should be all about the person's preferences, and like you, I really admire people that decide they don't want children for the right reasons. But if they're having to make that decision because they haven't got the support they need, then that's a whole different scenario.
Absolutely. And every person has the right to make that decision for themselves, not have that decision made for them from external factors. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it links to a question Lindsay's asked us, which is, what do you find is the best way to get your point understood by the authorities if you're having to advocate for yourself about something?
Okay, I've found when advocating for myself with the authorities, rightly or wrongly, you catch a lot more flies with honey. So whilst you want to F-blind swear and everything else, write down exactly what it is you want to say, because they do they get you tied up, get you flustered. Write everything down that you want to say, and just say, as awful as it sounds, but just say, I really appreciate your help. Thank you. I was wondering if you could let me know if. And should we have to stroke them and pat them on the back and guide them gently to where we want them to be? Absolutely not. Does it get you what you want? Yeah, 9 times out of 10. So I think be succinct, be straightforward, be very clear with what you want, but also be polite. And, you know, one thing I remember when I used to work on reception, when I had to be polite, was sometimes they're just following the rules. It's out of their hands. It's not their fault. So just keep that in the back of your mind, but be strong and don't give up, and always ask for their name.
Yeah. Listen, I've sat with you on reception and I've seen what your face looks like. So it's a good job you do this over the phone, because if they could see your face or online, it's a very good job that you're very expressive. That's what
I am a ray of sunshine. Thank you very much.
That links to a question that Danny's asked us again. His username is Majmini, and he knows us. You better do, but he knows us both. So, with a friendship of many years, what is the number one quality you love, like, admire about each other? Your face is telling a picture. For me, I think it is. I don't laugh with anyone the same that I laugh with you. I think, you know, we cry laughing a lot when we get together. And just because I know through everything I've been through in the last 25 years, you know, my first marriage ended after my husband had an affair. You were one of the people who was there for me. I had a little baby. You got me through the working day. You got me through cancer. You know, you got me through my second baby, who his middle name, Harry, his middle name is Paul, after Paula, because in a roundabout way, she introduced me to my second husband, who I've now been with for 20 years. So
I'm not taking the blame for that.
You are. You're taking absolutely the blame for that. So yeah, she's absolutely got my back, and she just makes me laugh so much. And
yeah, I mean, I would say the fact that you make me laugh until I cry whenever I see you, and you're the only person that can get me to eat oysters.
Yeah, I'm torturing Paula at the moment. If you follow my Facebook page, you'll know we're doing something every month that we've never done before. January was eating oysters, and the video, which I haven't posted, you can hear me laughing so much watching Paula eat, and then the oyster coming back, and a seagull came over, picked it up, and then dropped it, and even the seagull walked away. That is
how bad oysters are.
This is Paula's first for March, isn't it? Just you know, having your first.
This Facebook Live is my first. So
my first. Yeah, was publicly sharing stuff about my eating disorder, which I've never done before, which again, I think is something that needs to be talked about a bit more. So we're both having a different kind of first. And I'm sure we'll be going back to drinking something or eating something new next month, but we're trying to be a bit more highbrow this month. So this is our first for this month. Georgina's made a similar comment that she also thinks that people have a fear of saying the wrong thing. She had bad psoriasis for 30 years. And she was mortified when a little boy asked her questions about it. His mother was mortified, rather. The mother of the little boy was mortified when he asked questions about it, but she didn't mind asking at all, because she thinks it's important that it's understood.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the funniest things I always think is when there's a child that's clearly been made to walk out of the pushchair, and I'm trundling along in my wheelchair, and they look at me as if to say, "And what makes you so special?" But no, the best, most honest questions I've had usually come from children. It's as the adults are the ones that struggle. Yeah, and I don't want any child asking a question.
Yeah, okay. There's no filter to colour it, is there? It's completely honest.
And it's curiosity, and if you can grab it at that age and make them comfortable with it, then you've won. You know?
Yeah. And It always comes from a place of innocence when it's a child.
Absolutely, never any malice intended at that age. Never.
Absolutely. A lovely Mary Grand is asking a question. She's asked to you, Paula, what do you think the most positive changes in society in the past few years have been? And what do you think the most obvious changes that could be made? What would you like to see happen? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't want to sound negative because I'm trying to appear all bright and cheery, but I can't honestly say there's been a lot of positive changes in the last few years that I've seen. But then I think with any major change, it's a very slow, long process. And I think any what they class as minority group of people will tell you that it's slow but sure change. Some of the change I would like to see is actually probably from a selfish point of view, but is access and accessibility in travel and getting into places, especially companies like airlines. I know Sophie Morgan, who was in a car accident and was paralysed, is actually fighting the airlines at the moment because we're still not allowed to travel in our wheelchairs.
Yeah. So, there was that terrible thing, wasn't there, online recently where somebody was having to crawl up the aisle of the aeroplane to use the toilet?
To use the bathroom, yeah. And that's basically acceptable to the airlines. Now, up until recently, as you know, Jo, I've had a huge issue with the word ableism. However, when I've looked into it more, that is when ableism is displayed at its finest. How is it okay for a human being to crawl in the middle of the aisle of a packed out plane because they haven't made reasonable adjustments? She wasn't asking for anything special, just they've got like what they call an aisle wheelchair.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a slim chair that you sit on that gets you up and down the aisle. They'd forgotten to put it on the flight. Now, if you'd asked an able-bodied person, do you think it's okay if you just crawl up the aisle of a packed plane? Everyone would be up in arms.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's unfair. And, you know, this Sophie Morgan, she travelled to America, she got back, she had to, you have to check your wheelchair in as luggage. Well, it's not luggage, it's my ability to move about, but, you know, checking it as luggage. And actually it got to Heathrow and it was mangled. So then she was stranded at the airport.
Yeah, that was your biggest fear the last time you flew, wasn't it? That was going to happen.
Absolutely. Honestly, the relief when you see your chair coming off of the hold and it's in one piece. Oh, I could have cried. It was amazing. So that I'd like to see the travel industry more accessible.
I think Sharon Gullit-Norman said a similar kind of comment about the amount of places that have got disabled access and refuse to allow blind people with guide dogs, despite having disabled access. They don't allow.
Disgusting. I didn't think they were allowed to do that.
Yeah, there's also a misconception, as we know, don't we, from a recent sort of event we went to when my grandson had his first birthday. There's a themed restaurant fairly close to where I live, and I rang ahead in advance and asked if they had disabled access, which they said, oh yes, they do. As a bit of a backup plan, because we've been caught before, I've got a ramp that I keep at my house for when Paula comes over to make sure it's easy for her to access my house as well. So I thought I'll take that in the car with me just in case we need that little bit of extra help. When we got there, the step up must have been at least that big, mustn't it?
Easily.
Must have been at least that big. And they said, oh, well, we thought you were in a manual wheelchair. We usually just bump people up. We get people to help and bump up the wheelchair. But your wheelchair on its own weighs about 14.
Yeah, it's about 40, so you don't even want to know what it weighs with me in it. But
that's one of the questions we're refusing to answer tonight. What's our combined body?
But obviously, being an electric chair, it doesn't deal well with steep inclines. But not only that, we thought you were in a manual chair and we just usually bump them up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not accessible.
And then when I said,
what you want to call it, that's not accessible.
Oh, we'll get some other patrons to help. That was just, but in the end, I managed it. I just sheer anger, I think, drove me to manage to get it in the restaurant. But that wasn't the point. I mean, I'd had to kind of stack beneath the ramp some cardboard boxes that were folded up to make sure the ramp was higher. But we shouldn't have had to do that. No. And if I hadn't taken that ramp with me in the car, we would have been, you'd have had to.
I mean, I long for the day where you don't even have to ring ahead. Yeah, you just like, okay, it's a public cafe, coffee shop, restaurant, it will be accessible. And I'm sure that will happen one day soon.
Yeah. And Misa is saying she's had some similar experiences with disabled access, and then it hasn't turned out to be accessible at all. So I think it is just really difficult, you know, when you even when you have to make that. But you should, like you say, you shouldn't have to. It should, in this day and age, you shouldn't have to ring ahead in advance.
100%. I mean, I've been to a lot of different countries, and although we're quite advanced in some ways, in others we are way behind where we should be. It's embarrassing, actually.
You know, absolutely. One question I wanted to ask you, at the end of the book, without again any spoilers, Ella gets a surprise that you know, changes her life. Has anyone ever managed to surprise you with something?
Well, see, surprises are difficult for me now because we talk about accessibility, planning ahead, spontaneity kind of goes out of the window. But I have been surprised twice. You've been involved in both, so you are on my list. Watch your back. So the first one was, there were a couple of places on my list I didn't quite get to visit that I've always wanted to visit, but given where they are, Bora Bora, the Maldives, etc., it's probably not going to be possible. And I'd mentioned this to a friend of ours, Lucy, and then you and Lucy got together with my brother and some other friends, and then for my birthday I was bought a VR headset, virtual reality headset, which meant I could go and visit anywhere in the world that I couldn't get to. And the thought that went into that just kind of blew me away. And I do regularly. I've been to Anne Frank's house because Anne insisted on hiding in the roof, so I can't get to Anne Frank's house. So, but I can walk around it. I can have a look. I've been to Bora Bora. I've climbed Table Mountain in Cape Town.
You are inspirational. I don't know what you're talking about.
Shut your face. I haven't done it for real, have I? Crikey, those people put me to shame. But then the other surprise was you, when you told me my house was being vetted for the possible fostering or looking after rescue animals, and you gave me Audrey. And that was probably... I never thought anyone would melt my cold, cold heart, but she did. And she's pretty amazing, and she's made a massive difference. So.
She's got the best eyebrows on any dog I've ever seen as well.
I mean, come on now, please.
But also, I think the thing is that, you know, she was rescued as well. So you kind of found your, I think I was talking on my Facebook page this morning about soulmates, but you each found your other half.
Yeah. So you managed to surprise me there, and it was a nice surprise. Unlike the oysters, Audrey was a nice surprise.
You just wait. I'm cooking up a lot of things there. I've got some. Anyway, you give me I think our Christmas present. Are we swinging from a massive swing above?
Yeah, absolutely, and that is my revenge, because I can't believe I've got another 9 months of this. I can't cope.
So it goes both ways. So just to finish off, what's next for you? What is there anywhere? You know, other things on your list of places you want to go, things you want to achieve in the next?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some places closer to home. So having travelled, I realised how little of this country I've seen. So I was talking to you about that only the other day. So I'd like to do some more of that. I am still looking at the Maldives. I'm not quite sure how, but I might make that happen. But then, if I'm honest, it's just spending time with people that make me laugh and make me happy, and just doing, you know, spending time with the right people, I think, is what
the everyday things that everyone wants to do, I think.
Absolutely.
Just there's another comment from Sarah about accessibility, saying that she was having access issues with her guide dog, and the shopkeeper was yelling at her to get her dirty dog out of his shop, and he was obviously breaking the law.
You absolutely need to let your counsellor know. Do not let that lie. That's disgusting, and that's the most. And this is what I mean. See, in this day and age, get your dirty, disgusting dog. I mean, for a start, don't talk about any dog like that, because dogs are way better than humans, and that man is evidence.
I think that's something else we agree on, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, don't let that go. I would contact your local counsellor, newspapers, the works. Shame him into doing something about it and changing his attitude.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. We're coming up to the end of an hour, would you believe? It's absolutely flown past. Thank you for the questions. And say, if you're listening to this on catch up, please do post the questions. If we've missed anybody's questions or comments, we will come back in the next couple of days and add some responses to you. Thank you so much for coming along this evening and for being part of our conversation. Thank you to my beautiful friend Paula, who I have to say is beautiful, because when I did my International Women's Day post, I got told off for calling Beverly Hills beautiful and not saying.
No, Bev got beautiful, and I got long-term friend.
I've got far too many beautiful friends. I need to change that. But anyway, thank you so much. It's been great, and thank you to Boldwood Books for both allowing me to publish a book that talks about these really important issues, and for facilitating the chat tonight. It's been great to see you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.